Right now, there's a building in New York where representatives from 93 countries meet to discuss everything from wars to climate change to human rights. It's called the United Nations, and for nearly 80 years, it's been the closest thing humanity has to a global government. But here's what most people don't realize. The UN almost didn't happen. In 1945, as World War II was ending, the world tried to create an international organization once before, and it failed spectacularly. That was the League of Nations, and it couldn't prevent World War II. So what if history repeated itself? What if the United Nations failed to form in 1945? Today, we're exploring the alternate timeline where the world never got its second chance at global cooperation. Let's start with what actually happened. The League of Nations was created in 1920 after World War I. The idea was simple. Nations would talk through their problems instead of going to war. But it failed for three big reasons. First, the United States never joined, even though President Wilson championed it. Second, it had no real power to enforce its decisions. Third, when aggressive powers like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan started conquering their neighbors, the League could only write strongly worded letters. By 1939, the League was dead in everything but name. World War II proved that talking wasn't enough without the power to back it up. But as the war was ending, world leaders wanted to try again. Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin met multiple times to design a new organization, one that would learn from the League's mistakes. The key innovation was the Security Council. 5 major powers, America, Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, would have permanent seats and veto power. Yes, it was undemocratic, but it meant the big powers had a stake in making it work. On October 24, 1945, the United Nations officially formed. 50 countries signed the charter in San Francisco. But in our alternate timeline, it falls apart. Maybe Roosevelt dies earlier, and Truman isn't committed to the project. Maybe the Soviet Union demands too much power and the Western allies walk away. Maybe the Republican-controlled Congress refuses to ratify the UN Charter, just like they killed the League of Nations in 1920. However it happens, by late 1945, the negotiations collapse. There will be no United Nations. So what happens next? The immediate consequence is that there's no neutral ground for the Cold War. In our timeline, even at the height of US-Soviet tension, both sides met at the UN. Diplomats talked. Sometimes it was just for show, but sometimes it prevented escalation. Without the UN, there's no communication channel when crises hit. The Berlin blockade in 1948 becomes more dangerous. In our world, the UN provided a forum for negotiation while the airlift continued. In this timeline, there's no diplomatic pressure, no place for neutral countries to mediate. The blockade lasts longer and comes closer to triggering direct military conflict between America and the Soviet Union. The Korean War in 1950 plays out completely differently. In our timeline, the UN authorized military action to defend South Korea, giving the intervention international legitimacy. 21 countries sent troops under the UN flag. But in this timeline, there's no UN to authorize anything. When North Korea invades, America responds unilaterally. Fewer allies join. The Soviet Union, without a UN forum to voice opposition, is more likely to intervene directly. The Korean War risks becoming World War III. Decolonization happens, but it's messier and more violent. In our world, the UN provided a framework for colonies to become independent nations. New countries could join the UN, get international recognition, and participate in global institutions. Without that framework, independence movements face harder paths. Colonial powers hold on longer. Wars of independence in Africa and Asia drag on for years longer and kill more people. If you're hooked on these alternate history scenarios, hit that subscribe button right now. We drop a new mind-bending what-if video every week, and you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me on this one. Let's talk about what the world looks like in the 1960s in this timeline. There's no UN peacekeeping forces, so regional conflicts burn hotter. The Arab-Israeli wars have no UN observers to monitor ceasefires. The India-Pakistan conflicts have no mediators. The Congo crisis that killed hundreds of thousands in our timeline kills millions in this one because there's no UN intervention to stabilize the situation. International law develops much more slowly. In our world, the UN created the framework for human rights law, genocide prevention, and war crimes tribunals. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the UN in 1948, became the foundation for modern human rights. Without it, there's no agreed-upon global standard. Countries define human rights however they want, and there's no international pressure to change. Global health looks completely different. The World Health Organization is a UN agency. Without the UN, it doesn't exist, at least not in the same form. Smallpox eradication, which the WHO led in our timeline and completed in 1980, either doesn't happen or takes decades longer. Millions die from a disease that should have been eliminated. Climate change becomes even harder to address. In our world, the UN provides the only forum where every country negotiates climate agreements. The Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, all UN frameworks. Without that structure, there's no global climate negotiation at all. Each country does whatever it wants. By 2025, climate change is significantly worse because there was never any coordinated international response. The refugee crisis of the modern era is catastrophic. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees handles refugee situations worldwide in our timeline. In this timeline, there's no coordinated international response to mass displacement. When millions flee Syria after 2011, there's no UNHCR to coordinate aid. Refugees overwhelm neighboring countries with no international support system. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty never happens. In our world, the UN negotiated the NPT, which limited nuclear weapons spread. In this timeline, without that framework, more countries develop nuclear weapons. By 2025, instead of 9 nuclear powers, there might be 20 or 30. The risk of nuclear war is exponentially higher. Here's something interesting. Regional organizations become much more powerful. Without a global UN, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa create their own regional security systems. The European Union emerges earlier and stronger because Europeans realize they need continental cooperation to prevent wars. An Asian security organization forms to contain conflicts in that region. These regional bodies do some of what the UN did, but only for their own areas. The downside? These regional blocs sometimes compete and clash with each other. There's no global forum where Asian and European leaders can meet on neutral ground. Trade disputes escalate faster. Regional conflicts risk pulling in multiple blocs. The world is more fragmented, more prone to miscommunication and conflict. Space exploration is different too. In our timeline, the Outer Space Treaty negotiated through the UN in 1967 prevented countries from claiming territory on the moon or weaponizing space. Without that treaty, the space race becomes militarized. The moon becomes contested territory. Space weapons are developed. What should be humanity's greatest frontier becomes another battlefield. Let's jump to 2025 in this alternate timeline. The world is richer in some ways. Without UN regulations and international agreements, some industries grow faster. But it's also more dangerous, more divided, and more unequal. There's no global consensus on anything. Human rights vary wildly from country to country with no international standard to point to. Genocides happen more frequently and last longer. In our world, the UN at least provides a forum to spotlight atrocities and sometimes intervene. Rwanda in 1994 was a failure of the UN, but at least there was international attention and eventually intervention. In this timeline, mass atrocities happen in the dark. Millions die in conflicts the world barely knows about because there's no international body documenting and responding. Is this world better or worse? That's complicated. Some people would argue that the UN is ineffective anyway, that it talks but rarely acts, that it's a bureaucratic mess. And they're not entirely wrong. The UN has serious flaws. But without it, the world is objectively more violent, more chaotic, and more fragmented. The UN didn't prevent all wars, but it prevented some. It didn't solve all refugee crises, but it helped millions. It didn't stop all human rights abuses, but it created a language and framework for calling them out. Sometimes the value of an institution isn't in what it does, but in what it prevents from happening. The United Nations formed because world leaders in 1945 looked at the carnage of 2 world wars and decided humanity needed a better way. In another timeline, they decided it wasn't worth the effort wasn't worth compromising national sovereignty, wasn't worth trusting others. And the world paid the price for that decision every single day for the next 80 years. What do you think? Is the UN worth it despite its flaws, or would the world function better with just regional organizations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video opened your eyes to how important global cooperation really is, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to see it. We've got more fascinating alternate histories coming your way, so don't go anywhere.